Welcome to another episode of Culture8 Podcast brought to you by Ezini. This is where we explore how organizational culture actually shapes the way teams work, lead, and grow. In each episode, we go beyond theory to uncover real insights from leaders building cultures where people and performance thrive together. Today, I'm joined by Kerri Cufaro, founder of Trusted Talent Strategies. Kerri, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome. Please tell us about what is exciting with Trusted Talent Strategies.
I absolutely love that question because it's such exciting times right now that more leaders in companies are realizing more so than ever that hiring for their company isn't just a recruiting activity. It's actually an operating system for the business. So I'm finding out that a lot of companies I work with who are in that scaling stage, usually somewhere between 70 employees and 150 employees, where hiring worked when the company was smaller, but suddenly things really start to break. And this is important. They actually reach a point where hiring worked for years until suddenly it doesn't. So what happens is interviews look different depending on the manager. Recruiters are constantly chasing feedback. Leaders can't always clearly explain why one candidate was chosen over another. And that's the stage where Trusted Talent Strategies comes in, where I help these scaling companies turn from hiring from something that's mostly based on individual judgment into a repeatable system. So, and what that means is more clear role definition, structured interviews, better evaluation frameworks, and more importantly, stronger recruiting operations. So when companies get to fix those systems, they are then making these better hiring decisions and leaders feel more confident and the whole organization starts scaling more smoothly. So Trusted Talent Strategies helps these growing companies turn hiring from an ad hoc activity into a structured system that leaders can trust.
I love it. I picked up on a few words which I really love. You mentioned about scaling, and that exactly is the situation. Each organization goes through stages and they have to prepare for it in advance before they reach that state. So I love that scaling part of it. And ad hoc to, or rather repeatable, it's the key to success. It's a very important aspect of each thing that does the organization does. It has to be a way to make it standard operating procedure, make it repeatable. That's where the thing it creates that stage for the organization to scale better. So fantastic. Awesome. Anything you want to add further?
No, that's it for now.
Okay. All right. So before we take a deep dive into your views and beliefs about organizational culture, I would like to ask you a question to allow our audience to get to know you better. What was your very first job?
My very first job, which I absolutely loved, was waitressing in high-end restaurants and country clubs. And honestly, it taught me the skills that I still use today, because when you're waitressing, especially for high-end clientele, you're constantly reading people. You're anticipating what they need. You're managing so many different personalities at the table, and you're always thinking a few steps ahead. So I was able to learn very quickly how to understand people and situations in real time, which turns out to be really useful when you're working with leadership teams and helping them make these really important hiring decisions. So at the end of the day, hiring is really about understanding people, which is what I got from waitressing, really understanding their motivations, their communication style, and how they'll operate inside of a team.
Yeah, I love that because everyone carries their own motives around whatever objective they're trying to solve. So that makes a lot of sense. Fantastic. Awesome. All right, so let's jump right in. Now, from your experience working with growing companies, what does a company's hiring process reveal about its organizational culture?
I love this question because if you kind of take a step back, hiring processes are like x-rays of how a company actually operates. So if interviews are unstructured and if feedback is vague and decisions are made on just a gut feeling, that usually reflects a broader culture of ambiguity and inconsistent decision making. So these companies with the healthiest cultures tend to have the clearest hiring systems. And so it's when you get hiring that really feels chaotic it's rarely a recruiter problem. It's usually a decision-making problem. So hiring works until suddenly it doesn't.
I love that you brought that aspect. I love the analogy about the X-ray of an organizational culture. And of course, clarity in everything that the organization does will allow it to be much more successful. And as a organizational culture consultant, I always talk about decision-making clarity as well. That it's a huge, huge key stepping stone for organizations trying to grow, trying to scale their culture. And all of that
Right.
is talking about that as well. You scale your culture as well as you grow.
Exactly.
Awesome. Many leaders think that they have a hiring problem, but
Hmm.
sometimes it's really a culture or clarity problem, like we just spoke. What are some of the signs that you look for that the issue goes deeper than recruiting?
So many. Goodness, hiring managers really can't articulate what success looks like. And
Mm,
when they can't identify what success looks like, it's just really ad hoc. You hear so many times when they say, oh, you're not a culture fit, but they can't identify why, or
right.
they can't identify what success will look like in 30, 60, 90 days or a year from now. So that's one way. So that's a hiring manager issue. Also, when interviewers ask completely different questions when they're interviewing a candidate, they are not even realizing what the job entails. And maybe they're not even looking at the candidate's resume. So they're just kind of going off on a tangent and asking different questions. They're not
Right.
really sticking to who the company is and why this role is important and what this person, this candidate can bring to the table. They're just going off on a tangent. Also, when candidates get feedback like just didn't feel it or you just weren't a fit, that's not really explaining anything to the candidate. Also, when there's no scorecards, it's definitely helpful to have consistency when there's hiring. And so scorecards really do provide that consistency, which essentially means all of the candidates are being scored based
Mm,
on a rubric in terms of, 1 to 5 will give you, 5 being the best, that you provided the best answer or you're the best fit. Another way to see that is that recruiters are usually just chasing feedback
mm,
from the hiring managers. If they're constantly chasing feedback, that means that there's no structured interview in place, nor is there any structured interview feedback in place. And what
mm.
I do is I go into these growing companies and I create the scorecards and I create the feedback form that is just kind of automatic. And it could be AI generated as well. While you're having a conversation with the candidate, it could capture these notes and it can actually complete the feedback and the scorecard for the recruiters. So usually when companies don't have this, it's a culture or a clarity problem.
Yeah, I love it. I think, first of all, when you mentioned articulate what success looks like, I believe that's one of the most primary questions that any consultant or anybody who's looking to solve a complex problem of an organization should ask the medical question. If we are successful, what does that success looks like? So
Right.
I'm glad and I love that you bring
Right.
that.
And that could be metrics, that could be accomplishments, that could
Yeah,
be hiring a number of people or having a percentage of revenue saved or grown.
yeah,
So it's just having, and it's all about really having someone in your corner to help you identify that. Because maybe
yeah.
sometimes these companies and these hiring managers aren't being asked that question. So they've never really thought about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that's why trusted talent strategies exist because you brought about tangents, and that clearly shows that there's no clear direction. There's no idea about what you're trying to hire for and what are you trying to look for and so on. So I love that. That's the reason for your existence or your organization's existence.
Exactly.
I remember when you said something about scorecards and actually capturing what's going on in the interview and stuff. So I remember past organization we used to hire for solution architect positions, etc., and we would involve people, solution architects, in those interviews, and the idea was to score the individual so that you have a structured answer responses from various roles hiring for different kind of positions. So lovely that you're able to advise that to your clients. All right. And you talked a little bit about culture fit. So I'm going to go towards that. Hear a lot about hiring for culture fit, but that can sometimes limit diversity of thinking. How do you help organizations think about hiring people who contribute to the culture rather than just fit into it?
That's so important because I often hear about, the culture fit. And when I hear culture fit, it reminds reminds me of someone who's like us.
Yeah.
Because culture fit can accidentally become this proxy for you're like me, you are similar to me. Whereas, diversity of thought or someone that perhaps complements you, I think is what companies might be better off hiring for, to complement the culture. So, what I encourage leaders to actually focus on instead of culture contribution is asking what perspectives or strengths does someone bring that the team doesn't already have that could complement. So, and then I can connect that back to the structured interviewing because hopefully a company knows, maybe through assessments,
Mm.
what the personality or the culture of a person, hiring manager, or or the company is. And that could be created around interview questions where you're asking, hey, so the hiring manager has this type of personality and this type of thought process. How do you bring something that they don't have that could complement? And that could be part of the interview process.
Yeah, no, that's a very strong word that I just gravitated towards the word compliments. And obviously, you're not looking to hire the same kind of people. It's a natural tendency to do so. It's the word is called homophily. The idea is that we go and attract or connect with people who are like us. However, organizations are not really looking to need in this complex and dynamic world. They cannot survive by just doing like us people. If three of us was thinking alike, two of us are already redundant.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically about the complexity of the world, the different scenarios, the diversity thinking comes from our experiences, our life experiences, the mental models that have created based on which individuals make decisions. So if you do not have diverse thinking, you are stuck with same sort of solutions, which is not really what complexity requires. In order to solve complex problems, you need to have diverse sort of responses coming into a same problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I love
Right.
that.
And on that note, I think of politics. I think of the United States,
Yeah.
as a culture pot and in politics. I mean, I have plenty of friends who are on another political aisle than I am, but they're some of my best friends
Yeah.
because sometimes hearing someone else's opinion, we complement each other. And
Yes.
and just like the United States, where, this melting pot of diversity of thought, of personalities, of cultures. And it's what makes the country so wonderful.
It makes the country very strong. I come from a different culture like India, and I've seen it. Of course, I've seen a lot of different countries as well. I've lived on different continents and worked there, and I've seen India's the diversity of India. It's hugely diverse. There's so many different ways people like grow and or rather development of human stages, right? That makes that country very strong, and
Yeah.
I've seen that in the United States as well.
So, when we talk about culture in a company, it's a good analogy to think of a country.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's what it is. Even a country, it's basically the macro culture. So an organization is a micro culture and so on and
Hmm.
so forth. So, and speaking of, when you mentioned like when you're interviewing people, the culture of a person. So I'm like I said, into organizational culture. It's really about the person's values and beliefs is what the hiring team should be looking at to understand how is it complementing our shared culture,
Right.
shared values and beliefs. So phenomenal. I love this question. Thank you for a response. It was made my day. Right. Candidates often continuing to speak about the culture, candidates often experience a company's culture even before becoming employees. What signals in the hiring experience tells the candidate what the culture will really be like?
This is one of my favorite things to improve upon with companies because I feel that candidate experience is one of the most important aspects of a company's culture. And what a candidate says before, during, and after the interview,
Mm,
they're telling all of their friends. So it's
mm,
really important to, for example, prepare for interviews if you're a hiring manager.
mhm,
So if you are a candidate and you go into an interview with a hiring manager and they are literally just looking at your resume for the first time, they're not preparing. They're not asking questions. They're not looking at the structured interview questions.
mm,
They are just kind of ad hoc. They feel like they're being interrupted. So, how prepared are interviewers? That's a good way of a candidate seeing what a company's culture is like. Also, whether feedback is structured or even given at all, but whether it's structured, if someone just says, "Oh, I don't like them." But if they say, well, it's structured because they didn't have, the advanced knowledge of this tool, and we're looking for someone to do this with the tool.
mm,
So something more structured in the feedback would be helpful. But if they don't get that,
mm,
that's not a great sign from a candidate. Also, how quickly communication happens. I get that. I mean, everyone's talking about being ghosted. And so if you have a company that takes weeks and weeks, what's it going to be like when you're working with them in order to get anything approved or a decision made? So, how quickly a company communicates is also indicative of the culture. Also, whether interviewers ask thoughtful questions.
mhm,
Again, this goes back to the structured interview. If they're just kind of asking questions like, oh, what did you do over the weekend? Or, just something unrelated to the position and how you can help the company, that's
yeah.
also indicative. And also, all of this relates to whether or not the process feels intentional. Intentional is one of my favorite words
Oh,
because
yes.
if you're intentional about the hiring process, that goes back to the culture of the organization. So,
Mm,
yes, candidates can tell very quickly if a company runs on discipline or they're improvising. And I always will relate interviewing to the dating world because if you are on a date with someone and they show up disheveled, they don't even know your name, they never follow up with you. It's the
yeah,
same kind of thing as interviewing. So
yeah.
keep those kind of, that information in mind when when you're interviewing. Same thing with the dating. You're evaluating them as well
Yeah.
as they're evaluating you. So it is definitely a two-way relationship.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great analogy. I love the what you called out about prepared interviews. I mean, I to be honest, I'm an agile thinker and an agile growth mindset situation, and I always think yes, you should have discipline. Obviously, that allows you to, like we talked about, scaling, having standard operating procedures. But obviously, you have a capability and you will be able to improvise as the situation seems fit. But however,
Exactly.
like you call for it, it still needs to align with the structure, the goal, the purpose of that interview. The intention is a very powerful word, and that shows your culture. If you're not intentional, it will reflect on the way you conduct your interviews and your hiring process. And I love that what you call a communication delay. We are all humans. Hiring teams, if you're listening, please just be human, just communicate. Irrespective of your company has that culture or not, bring that to the organization.
Hmm.
Mature as human beings. So I love that. Thank you. Great answers, great responses. I'm sure my audience is going to love this. Lastly, if a founder or a CEO of say a 50 to 200 person company wants to build a culture, a strong culture through hiring, what are the first two or three things they should fix in their hiring process?
Yeah. So there are a few tactical things that a founder or a CEO can do to build a strong culture. Definitely what we talked about before is define success before opening the role.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't put a title out there. We want to define success because too many jobs are open without clarity. And that's why interviewers don't know what they're asking. That's why they can't answer the question, what does success look like? That's
Yeah.
why there's a communication gap in getting back to the candidates because they are meeting a candidate and then saying, maybe this person will be good for a different role, or I have no idea what this person was even talking about. So
Yeah.
definitely defining the success is going to avoid a lot of strife down the road. So it
Yeah.
could definitely build culture by defining that success of each position. Second thing is what we talked about is standardizing interviews. Every candidate should experience the same evaluation, be
Mm,
consistent, consistent, consistent. Lastly, I would say is to separate likability from decision criteria. And you can
Interesting.
do that using scorecards. I've had so many of my clients literally just hire on gut feel
Mm.
or, I think this person would be a good fit. But I mean, there are so many aspects of a scorecard, of this rubric in order to score someone based on other people in the organization and how they performed and how it's a good indicator of how some other new candidate might perform. So using those scorecards, and it's okay to revise those as a company grows or as you hire more people. So
Yeah.
that's okay. But
Yeah.
defining the success before opening the role, standardizing the interviews, and separating likability from decision criteria by using scorecards. CEOs can definitely improve the culture that way, and I can help them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love what you mentioned about defining success. It's really bringing not just clarity, it's also bringing the alignment. If I'm doing certain thing, aligning everything to a goal of the organization, right?
Hmm.
If you're not aligned, you're going to be doing all sorts of busy work, but is it
Random.
going to move the needle for the organization? Not necessarily. So alignment is so huge as well.
Hmm.
And I remember when you were talking about standardized interviews and you talked about hunch and gut feeling. I go with a lot of gut feelings. I am a human. I breed.
It's normal.
Yes, it is like, and it's how we make decisions. It's these gut feelings are nothing but mental models inside us. It's all psychology.
And,
And
and
so,
on that note, it's normal and it's okay when a company is small enough. I'm working with companies that are scaling and
yeah,
they're in this massive growth mode where they want things to be a little bit more automated and less gut feel as you grow.
yeah. And it's not to say that gut feeling shouldn't be. I mean, I'm from my perspective, even in organizations, I've worked in corporates as well. What I believe is that have that gut feeling, have that, but obviously also look at the data which is there because it shows certain and make that decision based on two
Right.
things, not just one. I'm
Hmm.
responding to a feedback, giving a feedback. My gut feeling says this, data says this, so here's my thoughts.
True.
Awesome. Fantastic. Let's move on to rapid fire questions. What book do you recommend the most?
So, about a year ago, I read Atomic Habits by James Clear. And what I love about the idea of atomic habits is that small systems
Mm,
drive outcomes more than big intentions. So, if you just make a 1% change each day, it'll
mm.
have a massive impact. And that applies directly to hiring, where companies often think that they have a talent or a hiring problem, but what they really have is a process problem.
Yeah.
So when you improve the system, the outcomes improve. And that's what I kind of got from Atomic Habits is just making small changes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love it. It's my work, my company's work is about helping organizations remove operational drag, identifying these invisible strains, reduce the drag, and then energize the team and increase the momentum, bring back the momentum.
Hmm.
Basically, we help to solve disengagement in organizations. And the way the system, which we call the Spark plan, it's a stabilizing system. The way it's designed is exactly that. One small practice each week till the next 12 weeks to change the way that we behave. So maybe
Hmm.
behavior by telling somebody or practicing to get to a new behavior. So I love that.
Right.
New habits for fantastic. What's one thing people would be surprised to learn about you?
Well, I told you about one of those things last week when I saw you in person. I ride a Harley Davidson motorcycle, Softail Deluxe. Also, another thing that people probably don't know about me is that I was adopted into my family at 4 months old.
Wow.
And I have since met my biological mother and biological father.
How fascinating. By the way, I love to ride. I can't wait for my daughter to start learning, or rather, learn how to ride, and then all of us will go for a ride
Yes,
for sure. Get some
absolutely.
is that while we are at it. Awesome. All right. One last thing. How can our listeners connect with you?
The easiest place is LinkedIn. I post a lot about hiring systems and talent strategy there. So Kerri Cufaro at LinkedIn. Also, my website, trustedtalentstrategies.com. It shows the the kind of work that I do with organizations, also with individuals as well.
Fantastic. Well, there you have it, folks. A fantastic, beautiful conversation with Kerri. I appreciate you so much. And thank you for being our guest today. And thank you.
Thank you.